Anime and live action usually go together as well as peanut butter and vomit. But is there a formula for success? Welcome back to OtakuDaiKun. It's time for a bit of a discussion. Since the onset of anime and video games, filmmakers have tried their damnedest to bring our favorite characters to the big screen, with real on-screen actors instead of meticulously placed lines and colors. We've had the Mario Bros. Movie, the Tomb Raiders, Resident Evils, Street Fighter, Dragon Ball Evolution, and I'd even include the Last Airbender. After all this time, it's pretty obvious they haven't figured out how to properly adapt anime and games into live action, assuming it can be done well at all. Just when you think Hollywood, or any studio really, is finally getting close to success, like Rurouni Kenshin or arguably Ghost in the Shell, we wind up with train wrecks like the Fullmetal Alchemist live action, or the Satan spawn that is the Netflix Death Note. It's a bizarre phenomena, one that I want to poke and prod at for your enjoyment. Spoiler warnings for all these films, by the way. The first thing I want to look at is why we get excited about live-action adaptations in the first place. Or why we used to, anyway. J.J. Abrams adapting Makoto Shinkai's Your Name? Fapping with a cheese grater is a smarter idea. Anyway, I think the underlying desire, on the fan side anyway, is to see our favorite franchises brought to life. We certainly say that 2D is better than 3D, but we still have that curiosity. There's some amazing cosplay out there that truly does look like anime brought to life. So what if that were an entire movie? What would it look like if, say, actual humans were being attacked by titans? What would Ryu shooting off a Hadouken actually look like? It also serves as another opportunity to revisit a work we already enjoy, only now in a new form. There's a chance that our niche hobby can be exposed to the world in a form that casuals will finally understand and accept. Hollywood films especially have a blockbuster effect, where everything is epic and exciting. We want to see how that formula fits a story that might succeed in it. But alas, we really only want to see these adaptations if they're good. But what does that mean? Most of the time, these live-action adaptations are a disappointment. Not necessarily in sales, but in quality judged by fans and critics alike. The most blindsiding disappointment probably came from The Last Airbender. Before the film came out, people were hyped as fuck about it. They'd flock to the theaters in cosplay, wearing their hopes and expectations on their shoulders. But the complaints varied. They said Aang, not Aang. They said Sokka, not Sokka. Aang's actor was emotionless and boring. The bending effects were cheesy. They rushed through the story. And there were no Kyoshi warriors. All of these are perfectly valid complaints. But I think they all boil down to, this is not the Avatar that I love. Some films, like Street Fighter, The Legend of Chun-Li, are just generic or poorly conceived movies that artificially inject slight likenesses or familiar characters in to try and help them sell. Without the tie-ins, some of these movies might actually be decent on their own. Probably not, but at least it's possible. The Matrix, for instance, took dozens of ideas from Ghost in the Shell, but still created an original trilogy. The older Street Fighter movie with Jean-Claude Van Damme, while a horribly inaccurate mess of an adaptation, is a surprisingly entertaining action comedy. At the very least, it looked enough like the original to serve as an abridged version of the games. That's a rare exception though, and I'd never want to see a film made that way in this decade. But yeah, going back to our basic hopes, most of the bad films in no way resemble their anime or game counterparts. Does live-action Chun-Li look like anime Chun-Li? Not even close. Live-action Tina doesn't look like Tina. This actress does not look like Starfire. Don't even get me started with Goku. Actually, never mind, let's look at that. Dragon Ball Evolution and the King of Fighters live-action film, if you even knew it had one, both failed to understand the core concepts of each franchise. In Evolution, they try to take Dragon Ball concepts and shove it into a modern setting. In KOF, they reconceptualize all the crazy fighting as part of another dimension. Sorry, but Goku really is an Asian bodybuilder who can turn into a super ape and launch laser beams. He really does live in a galaxy inhabited by various alien species. He really does fight a giant pink puffy fuck. And Kyo Kusanagi really does control flames in his martial arts. He's not a normal human warping to a fantasy world. Rather than honestly trying to recreate the worlds they're adapting, they try to force those worlds to fit what they'd rather film. It's so off base that, talking about faithfulness isn't even worth it. You've got an interesting case with the Fullmetal Alchemist live action. It certainly looks like it's anime, but it fails to bring the world genuinely to life. It fails to feel like Fullmetal Alchemist. Ed and Al look like Japanese kids with blonde wigs on, because that's exactly what they are. The film's loaded with great cosplay, but when you add in the fact that they have to act and perform alchemy in real life, it starts to fall apart. Gluttony is the prime example. He looks the part, but when he opens up his gaping maw, it genuinely looks funny instead of terrifying because the effects are so bad. Almost more egregious is the lack of emotion in its camera angles, color palettes, lighting, and acting. Though, I want to come back to the acting later. So yeah, we've got iconic scenes like revealing Nina as a chimera or the murder of Hughes, but they pitifully fail to deliver the same emotional response as their original works. It's the same issue with the Japanese live-action Death Note movies. Just look at the difference in the emotional appeal when Light is finally caught and brought to justice. The angles, the lighting, the sound, even the setting, all of them seem like the live action is just going through the motions. Now, whitewashing aside, the live action Ghost in the Shell most certainly does look like Ghost in the Shell. You can at least tell they read the manga and watched the main two movies, and wanted to do it justice, at least visually. It often depicts scenes shot by shot the way they looked in the animated films. It certainly helps, but it did what I thought it was going to do from the get-go. Take the philosophy-potent cyberpunk and squeeze it into a generic sci-fi action film. Rather than carefully taking its time, building symbolism and meaning in the characters and their dilemmas, it glues us wall to wall with intensity. I think they proved they misunderstood some key aspects when the generic bad guy actually blurted out the words, "Spider Tank." Essentially, it's a reasonable adaptation on the surface, but it fails to, dare I say, capture the ghost within the shell. Oh boy, and then there's the Netflix Death Note. Believe it or not, I was actually on board with the concept of this film when I first heard of it. What if Ryuk's Death Note happened to fall into the hands of an American kid? The amount of crime, the types of crime, and the enforcement of them are all different in the United States, that they really had a lot to work with. Would Light Turner put an end to all these public shootings? My complaint is that they lost track of the philosophical and ethical core that defines Death Note. They failed to take the concept of Death Note and make an otherwise original movie in a new setting. It's stuck between being its own film and basically lampooning the original. Then we have the issue of writing. Even if you were to look and feel like the original work, there's always the problem of trying to cram a ton of material into a comparatively small runtime. A lot of the trouble is that live-action adaptations usually insist on retelling the same story, like some kind of reboot cinematic universe, rather than telling a completely new story set in that world. The animated movie for Cowboy Bebop told a self-contained story that would cleanly fit between a number of the TV show's episodes without ruining the original plot. If a live-action Cowboy Bebop were to do the same, it could exist without being constantly compared, shot by shot, to the original. When they wrote the live-action Fullmetal Alchemist, they seemed hell-bent on jamming as many iconic scenes from the series as they could, even if it meant skipping all the emotional build-up that made scenes pay off. A lot of times these movies will combine characters or their roles in the story to more easily bridge the gap between events. The mysteries of Laboratory 5 are blended in with the artificial dolls we don't normally see till the end of the series. And Show Tucker takes on the same moments meant for Barry the Chopper. Initial D's live-action film also does this when it mixes two different characters, the humble team leader Iketani and the whiny baby Itsuki, into one composite dude. Takumi's first race against Keisuke in the anime was restructured to be a race against Takeshi Nakazato. And the climactic race at the end combined Takumi's separate battles against Ryosuke and Kyoichi into a 3-car showdown. This phenomena can be really awkward when the characters act, well, out of character, fulfilling multiple roles without the necessary build-up or motivation. Again, they're better off coming up with an original story that can actually be told in a feature film's runtime. Those were all the ways in which live-action adaptations have failed their sources. But what if you manage to create a film that looks and feels like its source, without butchering any of the characters or their world building? Even if you pull that off, you may very well still wind up with a disappointing film. And that comes from our false expectations. We might be curious to see what our favorite anime look like in real life, but that doesn't mean we'll actually like the result. In the end, anime and live action are simply too different. What works in one does not work in the other without sacrifice or manipulation. Actually, Fullmetal Alchemist is still a perfect example of this. You know, when the characters make those silly cartoon expressions, particularly when someone calls Ed short, humans can't do that. When Ryuko Matoi bends backwards to slash Senketsu, well, the human spine can't bend that far. You might ask, well, just how important are those things? And I'd agree, that's a genuine question I'll have a different answer for. But what I can say is that for the characters in that animated world, those things are genuinely happening. To them, things truly are that exaggerated. Alchemy, when drawn, is very blocky and filled with sketch lines, giving it a unique texture that's iconic to both the anime and manga. But unless you're trying to make this look like Roger Rabbit, you can't do that with CG alchemy. But for Ed and Al in the animated world, that's genuinely how alchemy looks. If you don't get what I'm trying to say, look at the acting of a Japanese drama or live-action adaptation. The actors try their best to act just like anime characters, even though real people don't behave that way. It almost always comes off as fake, awkward, or melodramatic. It's the sort of thing that may work on a theater stage, but in live-action cinema should be much more subtle. The same scenes that might make us get goosebumps or cry in anime will instead make us laugh when real humans try to act them out. Essentially, making a live-action adaptation of an anime, while we think it's bringing our anime to life, is actually just amputating all the qualities it had being anime in the first place. Now, I've specifically held off talking about the Rurouni Kenshin live-action films, because I think they serve as a guide on how to do live-action right. These films, while suffering from a lot of the same issues I just described, have elements that truly resonate well in live-action. Rurouni Kenshin is a rather profound manga and anime series that has a lot of appeal outside the realm of animation. Heck, throughout most of the series, its animation is actually pretty cheap and unimpressive, depending on the episode. Beyond that, it offers us a glimpse into a real-life historical era that's already been successfully depicted on film. Period dramas featuring samurai are a mainstay in Japanese film. Akira Kurosawa's Seven Samurai and Yojimbo are amazing films that have inspired Japanese filmmaking to this day. As such, the content of Rurouni Kenshin, at least a whole lot of it, lends itself brilliantly to this type of film, to the point where, in some ways, Kenshin's live-action outings are actually superior to their source. These films add choreography to the swordplay, which their source lacks, minus the OVAs anyway. In other words, the live actions provide us a Rurouni Kenshin experience that only film can adequately provide. I've essentially pointed out the key to a good live action. Before choosing to adapt anything, it's important to consider what live action as a medium can bring to an existing work. Rather than worrying about if you'll be able to recreate the anime with actual people, you need to ask yourself if the anime is in any way compatible with the medium you're working in. Sadly, that means you'll come across dozens of anime that you shouldn't dare adapt. But that's the point, isn't it? This approach certainly doesn't negate the need to be delicate with the way you portray the source, but it does provide an avenue to focus on what actually gives the film a reason to exist. If a given anime's appeal is almost entirely its art style, like Gurren Lagann or Kill la Kill, then stay the fuck away from it. Another way to conceive it is to imagine you're the original creator, with all these amazing ideas in your head, but you don't know what form to make your story in. You could make it a movie, an animation, a book, or a video game. Imagine you were to build that story from the ground up, to fit live-action cinema. How much would it look like the actual source? You probably wouldn't give the characters colorful spiky hair or skimpy outfits. Like, nobody in their right mind would design an outfit for Katniss Everdeen that looked like Senketsu. Put simply, that design just isn't compatible. But so many others are. With that, I'd like to end this video by brainstorming some ideas for anime that actually would be cool to see portrayed in live action. Initial D is an anime ripe for the adapting. Its current live-action film is interesting but clumsy as hell overall. Why the fuck would you use CG to show off drifting, when Shuichi Shigeno literally based the manga off of actual drift racing culture that existed at the time? Don't make the film in China, use the real deal. Slap GoPros all over cars, rent out a toge, and drift the fuck out of those corners. We have real documented footage of these kinds of races. Plus, Initial D isn't just a set of characters, it's a phenomena. It doesn't even have to feature Takumi, but even if it did, both he and the Red Suns, or Project D, race so often that you could tell a number of original stories between the main races in the manga. Oh, and what initial D movie would be complete without Eurobeat? Get that shit back in there. Basically, our current live action just doesn't cut it. You could argue the same for The Last Airbender. Bending choreography is something that you could totally do in a live action setting, but you definitely have to limit the scope of the narrative you're trying to tell. Fate Stay Night. Just kidding. That's a terrible idea. Maybe Kata no Kyokai though. If you were truly passionate about it, you could make a decent film. The way the characters act in those films is much more down to earth compared to other anime. It'd translate better on camera actors. That said, I don't think it would ever look better than Ufotable's work. Steins Gate. With the right cast, it could be fun. The fact that Akihabara is an actual location would certainly lend to the authenticity. The real dilemma there would be trying to condense the narrative, since it doesn't really leave room for original stories. You'd probably have to make more than one film to do it justice. Metroid. You could argue we already got a Metroid movie with Other M, which was a flawed first attempt at letting Samus speak. But you have to admit that the commercial for the game, which was live action, was pretty damn cool. In better hands, I definitely think they could make one hell of a space adventure. Cowboy Bebop. I don't think Keanu Reeves would be the right guy, but there's gotta be someone who could pull off Spike, minus the haircut. Tell the story of when he used to be in the Syndicate. All those flashbacks we get would be cool to have developed further. Oh, and here are some anime that should never be adapted. Just don't do it. I'm serious. Some people love doing things solely because they were told not to. Don't be that person. Prisma Ilia, unless you want your film to be banned worldwide. Utowareru no, No Game No Life, Code Geass, Ruby, Clannad, Neon Genesis Evangelion, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, Fairy Tail, Panty and Stocking with Garter Belt, and Love Live. Really any well-known idol anime, really. Well, there you have it. I know there are other YouTubers who have covered this topic, but I've intentionally avoided seeing them because I wanted to give you my own opinions, even if they overlap with what's out there. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please like, comment, and subscribe to OtakuDaiKun for more anime lists, reviews, discussions, lore videos, live streams, and the Holy Waifu Wars. If you're interested in seeing this channel grow, please consider becoming a patron or donating in a super chat during any of my weekly live streams. Also, feel free to check the description for my social media profiles, including an ever-growing Discord full of fans of anime and the Fate series. Until next time, celebrate your fandom.